Mike Bloomberg got his 4 more years. But it wasn't the landslide he expected or paid for. Can the mayor maintain his power? And what will redeem his honor? It's Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. The AFT. Here in New York, it's Bloomberg, Mayor, de Blasio, Public Advocate, and Lou, Comptroller. And across the Hudson, Christie, not Corzine, as governor. Tonight, we'll dig into the surprising results of the election with blogger and New York Post writer Robert George and Liz Holzman, who knows firsthand what John Liu faces in these extraordinary financial times. Holzman was city controller, as well as Brooklyn DA, after her years in Congress. Also tonight, a glimpse at the private art that banks display in their boardrooms. Now that we, the taxpayers, have bailed them out, don't we deserve a look too? And among our video picks tonight, where the wild things aren't.
Are you gonna eat me? I'm a vegan. Let the wild rumpus start!
We got a bike ride. Yeah, nice.
For your own sanity, please tune away. Maurice Sendak. Before we deconstruct the election, let's examine the national issue that's heating up the web. Here are this week's online video picks, and most of them are videos in support of health care reform. No bias here. While opponents have the edge in the town hall meeting protest department, the advocates of Obama-style reform seem to dominate the web video sphere. The first two both come from residents of Ditmas Park, Brooklyn. One serious, one funny. They were both selected as finalists in the Health Reform Video Challenge from the Obama-related group Organizing for America. Jeremy Byler made this one called Serve and Protect.
16 on unit.
He took everything, my TV, my computer, all the cash I had upstairs, everything.
Okay, do you see which way you might have gone?
Yeah, he's right there.
All right, we'll go ahead and get him arrested for you today. Can I just see your insurance card?
I just changed plans. I used to have police coverage through my husband's job.
Okay, did you report some graffiti on the side of this building in 2005, ma'am?
Yeah.
All right, unfortunately, that's a pre-existing condition for this property, so you're not covered for a break-in.
16 responding. Grab some more of your stuff. I'll be out of your hair in just a minute.
Oh, I want to get my son one of those.
So that was the funny one. Imagine if law enforcement was done like healthcare. What a system. The earnest one was made by Franklin Straker, called Angela's Story.
Last year, I was earning $100,000 at a career that I loved. Last month, I had to choose whether to pay for my medications or pay my rent. I didn't lose my job because of the economy. I was diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's disease 10 years ago. If you lose your job because of an illness, you lose your health care. No one should have to make that choice.
Again, both those videos made by residents of Ditmas Park, Brooklyn, both finalists in the Health Reform Video Challenge. We thank Ditmas Park Blog for bringing them to our attention. Angela's story may be one woman's story of health problems causing financial problems, but what's the big picture? Another video being passed around by advocates of reform is a short clip from a U.S. Senate hearing where a witness said health reform would cause more bankruptcies in America. Unfortunately for her, she said it to Senator Al Franken.
Dr. Roth. I think we disagree on whether healthcare reform, the healthcare reform that we're talking about now in Congress should pass. And you said that kind of the way we're going will increase bankruptcies. I want to ask you how many bankruptcies because of medical crises were there last year in Switzerland?
I don't have that number in front of me, but I could find out. And
I can tell you how many it was.
Get back to you.
It's 0. Do you know how many medical bankruptcies there were last year in France?
I don't have that number, but I can get back to you if you like.
Yeah, the number is 0. Do you know how many were in Germany?
From the trend of your questions, I'm assuming the answer is 0, but I don't know the precise amount, and I would have to get back to you.
Well, you're very good. You're very fast. The point is that I think we need to go in that direction, not in the opposite direction. Thank you.
Do you know the cancer survival rates in those countries?
You know, you've picked on one, and if you look at that study, did you know that we pick much more easily survivable cancer rates? So if you want to start getting into digging deep in the studies, that study isn't legitimate. I've heard that before. That's because we find easily survivable cancers to count as ones that we survive. So if you want to, you know, you can cherry pick stuff to find one little place where somebody says our system works better than the French or the Germans, but we're talking about bankruptcy here today. And the fact of the matter is, you're saying that if we go more to a French system or a Swiss system, that we'll have increased bankruptcies, but the fact is they don't have bankruptcies and we do for medical care. Thank you.
He's come a long way from Saturday Night Live, right? Opponents of health reform are also resonating on the web, if not with the snark of Al Franken. Video number 4 for this week is House Minority Leader John Boehner with 4 reams of paper on his side.
It's not just the so-called government option. It's the over 50 new mandates, bureaucracies, tax hikes, commissions. All of this is going to require tens of thousands of new federal employees, which is clearly designed for a government takeover of our health care system. So no listening and 1,990 pages. Now tell me how we're going to fix our health care system with 1,990 pages of bureaucracy. This is what the American people have been saying over the last few months. Enough is enough. Republicans continue to have better solutions. You can go to healthcare.gop.gov and to see the solutions that we've been promoting to make our current healthcare system work better. But this bill is pretty clear. It's going to raise the cost of Americans' health insurance. It's going to kill jobs with tax hikes and new mandates in it. And it's going to cut seniors' health care benefits. And if all that isn't bad enough, the mandates on states will bankrupt what are already states that have huge financial problems today.
4 health reform-related videos. That campaign being fought very hard online. And video pick number 5 for this week, the classic children's book, Where the Wild Things Are, is now a major motion picture. This new video, Where the Dirty Hipsters Are, may be the Williamsburg version.
Hey, I didn't want to wake you, but they're screening Fellini at the art house.
How did we end up in the actual woods? I don't know, I'm kind of over it. It's pretty lame.
Why don't we just go to the woods on La Brea at sunset?
Yeah, I'm down.
Are you gonna eat me? I'm a vegan.
Let the wild rumpus start!
We got a bike ride. Yeah, nice. This is our crew.
Hey, Amira, I'd shave, but like, why? What, you want me to?
Huh? No.
Whatever, conformist. This is Judith.
Hey kid, can I bum a smoke?
No, I'm 10.
Whatever. I only smoke American Spirits anyway.
This is Douglas. I count on for all my music, gossip, and information.
Wow! You made this?
Yeah, it's a bunch of small indie bands you probably wouldn't even heard of.
This is Alex.
Is that vintage? Or is that faux designer chic?
My mom made this.
Sure she did.
Where the Dirty Hipsters Are from Secret Sauce TV. And those are this week's online video picks. It's Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. It wasn't a landslide, it was more like blowback. After undoing term limits and spending $80 million, maybe $100 million more than his challenger, William Thompson, Mayor Mike Bloomberg won yesterday, but by just 5 percentage points. Polls were predicting 12 or at one point 20. Money didn't work in New Jersey either. Worse, in fact. Democratic incumbent John Corzine lost to Republican Chris Christie. Back in New York, Bill de Blasio will be public advocate. John Liu will be city controller. What will Liu face when he takes that office? And what does yesterday's vote tell us about the mayor's power and coming third term? Joining us, a veteran of politics and public service, Liz Holzman. She sat in that city controller chair for 8 years, served as Brooklyn DA, and was a member of Congress. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Now, the mayor did win. He won. He didn't lose. A lot of the media is making it sound like he lost this election. If he had won by 8 points, would we be having this kind of conversation?
Probably not. It's all an issue of expectations. If you're expected to, it's like stock prices. I mean, if it sort of depends on what people expect. They expected this a blowout result for Mayor Bloomberg, and it wasn't a blowout result. It was a very sobering result. And of course, the other thing that one has to note about this election was that the turnout was the lowest, I think, on record.
And this is where it gets interesting. I was looking at the exit poll stats in the New York Times today, and I think we see a few really interesting things. Joyce Pernick, who just wrote a book about Bloomberg, pointed out to me that the entire decline in voting from 2005 came among Bloomberg voters. In other words, Bill Thompson got practically the exact same number of votes as Freddie Ferrer did running against Bloomberg in 2005. So what happened was the people who don't like Bloomberg turned out. The people who do like Bloomberg, some of them, stayed home. That's a pretty interesting result.
Right. Well, it makes sense.
and so what does it tell us?
Well, it tells us that there's really a lot of unease about his third term, and a lot of unease about the economy, a lot of unease about politics in general. I don't think New York City is alone in that respect. We've seen some unusual upsets in Nassau County, Westchester County, New Jersey, where heavily financed incumbent lost pretty heavily, and in Virginia, the Democrats didn't do too well.
And then you look a little more closely at the exit polls and ask, well, who were these former Bloomberg voters who stayed home? And again, according to the Times exit polls, they were overwhelmingly minorities in lower income and working class neighborhoods, meaning the mayor's remaining coalition is more among middle class and upper class whites than before. Do you think that has implications for how he'll govern?
Well, I think the mayor's the mayor, and he's going to have to reach out, even with a narrow electoral base. He's going to have to reach out and try to include the city in his decisions. There are going to be tough decisions ahead. Budget deficits, there are going to be cuts to be made, questions about whether revenues are to be taxes or additional revenues are to be raised in different ways. Very tough and unpleasant decisions. And if the mayor is ruling only from one side, it could be a problem.
But is he, I mean, he would say that he's been a very inclusive mayor all along. From day one, when he was first elected 8 years ago, he met with Al Sharpton, symbolically breaking from Rudy Giuliani's governing style. Has he not reached out? Does he need to heal this rift in some new way?
Well, I think the rift may not be so much a racial rift as an economic rift. I give the mayor top marks, actually, for lowering the decibel level on racial tension in the city. I mean, as DA in Brooklyn, we had a lot of issues. I had to deal with a lot of the racial tension in the city, so I'm very glad that the mayor really went out of his way on every occasion to try to smooth that over. I'm not talking about reaching out only on a racial basis. I'm talking about the mayor's having to reach out on an economic basis, and I guess to quote President Bill Clinton, to feel people's pain. We have huge unemployment. Unemployment may be rising in this city. We've got to be talking about creating jobs, not just for people who are laid off on Wall Street, but for other people. Where is the job creation going to come from, and how's the mayor going to relate to those issues? I think that's what he's going to have to address, in my opinion, and reach out in that way to the pain that New Yorkers are feeling about the economy.
Since it was only a 4.5%, 5% spread, Democrats seem to have a list of if-onlys today. If only Obama had come and campaigned for Thompson like he did for Corzine.
Well, that didn't do too much for Corzine, so I checked that off a list. I crossed that off.
I guess it didn't. If only Anthony Weiner, who some pundits think would have been a stronger candidate, had stayed in the race and beat Bill Thompson in a primary.
Well, what if, you know, one can easily go through that. It's possible a stronger Democratic candidate might have won. Billy Thompson, in my opinion, very nice fellow, but ran a rather lackluster campaign. Of course, he was totally outspent and outblitzed, if you will, by the media and by the paid advertising of Bloomberg. But it's possible that a different kind of campaign run by a Democrat could have beaten Bloomberg.
And I think you touched on the other if only, which is if Bill Thompson had chosen to run more on a platform of what he would do in the next 4 years, rather than focusing so heavily and almost exclusively on what Bloomberg has done wrong. You think? I mean, I know people who said they were waiting for Bill Thompson to give them something, but all he gave them was the criticisms of Bloomberg that they already shared, and that wasn't enough.
Yeah, it was a lackluster campaign that he ran. I mean, if you go back and look at the numbers, for example, even in the minority community that David Dinkins got when he first ran compared to Bill Thompson, I mean, the disparity is enormous. So I think it wasn't just, I think he might have been able to do better, but he's not a kind of aggressive guy. So in any case, we have this mayor. And I think he's going to have to reach out. And I think he's also going to have to reach out because he's going to have two people as watchdogs who are going to be much more aggressive in their watching than he had before, namely the public advocate and the Comptroller. Bill de Blasio will be, I think, a lot tougher in his scrutiny of the mayor than Betsy Gotbaum was. And I think John Liu will be tougher on the mayor than Bill Thompson was.
Let's talk about
not necessarily tough in a negative sense, but just saying, okay, these are problems and we've got to address them.
You were once New York City Comptroller. What does that mean in the context of the Comptroller's office to be tough on the mayor? How, for example, might John Liu do that?
Well, I think there are two, I want to be more nuanced about it because it's not just an issue of being tough on the mayor. The Comptroller has a responsibility, for example, to opine on the budget, to give his or her opinion about the budget. The city, when I became Comptroller, there was no economic forecasting mechanism. Nobody understood that we were about to go into economic financial straits. I developed a system. We were able to forecast that. And then the issue was educating the city and the mayor. What are we going to do about it? The problem that the Comptroller...
What was that? What years were those?
1990 to 1993. So that was the last really big fiscal crisis we had.
During that fiscal crisis.
Correct.
During the Dinkins years.
Right.
And I misspoke when I said you had that job for 8 years, right?
It was only 4 years.
Yeah.
Correct. The Comptroller, that job is really important because if the city has a deficit of more than $100 million, it's going to be taken over by the Financial Control Board, which would be a disaster for this mayor who prides himself on being a good manager, and it would be a disaster for the city because we want to be able to be in charge of our own destiny. So the Comptroller plays a key role in alerting the mayor, the city council, the other forces in the government about what the budgetary issues are. Are we likely to have a $100 million deficit? And are we likely then to go into financial control? This could
Financial control would mean the state takes over the city,
Correct.
And nobody wants to lose that autonomy.
No, that's correct. Nobody wants that to happen. It's an embarrassment as well as a bad thing for the city to happen. So the Comptroller plays an important educational role. You have to be, and this is not a confrontation, doesn't need to be confrontational. This is a situation in which you say, look, I've done an analysis of the numbers. You know, sometimes political officials like to fudge those numbers a little bit. I see what the numbers are. These are my numbers. And if we're wrong, somebody may say, well, but I have a different view. The problem is if you're wrong, you're going into financial control because $100 million in the city's budget is a very small number, actually.
So that's the bedrock responsibility of the job, along with running the pension funds.
No, that's another part of the job. But getting the budget right and working with the mayor, blowing the whistle if the budget is going to be out of balance, that's a very critical job that the controller has. And I don't think it has to be confrontational. I see it as an educational job that the controller has. The second job is managing the pension funds. Third job is managing the city's borrowing. The city, when I was controller, we borrowed more than $20 billion over the period of time I was controller. How do you borrow at the cheapest rates possible? How can you be innovative? How can you sell the city's debt in a way that saves the city and the taxpayers the most money? That's another huge job. Sometimes the mayor's not too interested in that. The mayor's interested in cleaning parks, but you know, billions of dollars can be saved if the bonds are sold in a proper way, if the debt is handled properly. And the final responsibility of the controller is an audit and a bully pulpit responsibility. The controller can audit what's going on and going wrong in the city, find savings, point out ways in which you can save money, or use a bully pulpit, not necessarily the audit process. But we took on the whole issue of the city's incineration program when I was controller. We pointed out that was going to cost billions of dollars and pollute the air. It was a no-brainer from a fiscal and health point of view, so we changed that.
I'm glad you brought that up, because my recollection of you as controller is that you did use it in conjunction with your interest in social justice and issues other than purely fiscal ones. So you mentioned public health and environmental pollution,
right.
Not strictly the controller's job.
No, but it was, because the amount of money that it would have cost to build these incinerators as opposed to going into recycling programs and other efficiency programs was huge. It was an enormous, it was a multi-billion-dollar issue. That's why I took it on. So the control money, if you follow the trace of money, it goes into everything. We're talking about food stamps, whether you're talking about schools, where are the savings, how is the money being spent. I mean, I remember sitting with the chancellor of the Board of Education because the budget of the Board of Education wasn't transparent. Where is this money going? What could they do also about savings in purchasing or buying heating fuel or other kinds of things? So
but is it also possible to use the office and the auditing powers, I think, in particular, to achieve other policy goals? Lou comes out of a fairly activist background. He cares about a lot of things. So did you. When you were controller, I think I remember an audit having something to do with women's health, yes, where maybe the end goal was not so much saving $20 as improving women's health. Is that an exaggerated memory?
No, that wasn't an audit, but it was a report that we put out. The city wasn't doing screening mammograms, and the consequence in municipal hospitals. And the consequence was that they only did a screening mammogram after a lump was detected in a woman's breast, which means that it's a very late stage. That was going to cost us, it did have a dollars and cents aspect, because it would cost more money aside from costing lives. So we were able to change that system. I think the controller, growing out of concern about money, but also concern about people, can do a lot to make the city a much more livable place. And I'm very pleased that John Liu has won. I think his victory represents a big breakthrough for the Asian American community, but more for the idea of New York, that this is a place of opportunity for everyone.
And as a stronger controller, if a mayor is weaker, then will he actually do different things, or can he do different things?
Well, let's put it this way. If you have a very good and careful and thoughtful controller, you can persuade the mayor to do things that the mayor might not have wanted to do. You don't have to do it always by going public and by having public fights, but the controller has a lot of power to help influence and shape ideas in the city, to help educate the mayor. I mean, during the fiscal crisis, I remember sitting time after time with the deputy mayors and going through a blackboard exercise with the $100 million on the bottom. You know, here's our revenues, here are our expenditures. Now what? Do we have $100 million in deficit? Do we want to be taken over by financial control? So now what are we going to do about it? So those were very important exercises, and ultimately we were able during that administration to stave off financial control, although we were in a fiscal crisis and the city lost 150,000 jobs.
Any impression, and I realize you're not looking at the books today, but of how much of a fiscal crisis we're in right now. The economy is somewhat bouncing back. Unemployment is still very high. The state seems to be in worse fiscal shape than the city government. How's New York City doing as far as you can tell?
Well, I have to compliment Mayor Bloomberg for taking some proactive steps in when times were good and putting some money away for a rainy day. That was a wise policy. But I think there's going to have to still be some belt tightening, and there's going to have to be some very painful decisions. And that's why I think for the mayor to be able to win public support for these decisions, he's going to have to show the people of New York City that he understands the plight of working people, of poor people, of middle-class people, not just the very rich.
You didn't endorse in the mayoral race. You did endorse David Yaski in the Comptroller's primary, but you're happy now with John Liu.
Well, I supported John Liu in the general election, and I think he'll be an excellent controller. I have every confidence in him.
Can you give me a quick thought on the implications of these losses for the Democrats for national policy, for health reform, or for anything else that the president wants to do?
Well, I think if we see anything, there's a lot of anxiety. This election is about voter anxiety about the economy. The loss of jobs is huge. People are still very anxious. They think that the stimulus didn't work very well. They're not sure about this giveaway. They certainly don't like the giveaway to the banks because they just see huge giveaway, and they still are getting foreclosed and all these huge credit card fees, and the banks aren't lending. So there's a lot of consternation about that. I think Washington has to pay a lot of attention to the economic plight of ordinary Americans, and has to pay attention to job creation, has to pay attention to getting those banks to start lending and to be treating consumers and depositors in a fair way. These are things that Americans are going to care a lot about. Deal with homelessness, foreclosure, those issues that are weighing on people's minds.
The White House needs to do it, as City Hall needs to do exactly
Correct.
that. Liz Holzman, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Coming up, a different view of His Honor and the election results from New York Post editorial writer and blogger and comedian Robert George. It's Brian Lehrer Live.
These kids almost had a new community center. A contractor almost volunteered to build it. A carpenter almost worked on the crew. And everyone else almost gave at the fundraiser. They almost gave. Almost. And these kids? Well, they almost stayed out of trouble.
Say, are you worried about H1N1? You know, swine flu. Well, CUNY says protect yourself from hidden horrors. Here's how. After touching public surfaces, don't touch your eyes, nose, or mouth. Flu is also spread when infected people cough at you. Sneeze into a tissue, never your bare hands. Or use your elbow. Wash often with soap and water. Or use an alcohol-based hand cleanser. There are two kinds of flu shots this season. Consult your doctor or healthcare provider on the regular and H1N1 vaccinations. Most importantly, if you feel sick and have fever, stay home. Yes, a little caution goes a long way.
For more information, visit our website, cuny.edu, and click on H1N1 Update.
This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Our next guest, Robert George, has been tough on Mayor Bloomberg from the start. He is an editorial writer for the New York Post and writes his own blog, Ragged Thoughts. What's more, he has tried his hand at stand-up comedy. In January at the New York Comedy Club, he introduced himself by saying, "This is the Catholic, Black, West Indian, Republican portion of the program."
The downside of crime going down in New York, it is so much harder for black men in New York to really freak out women on the Upper West Side. I mean, back in the old days, back in the old days, you walk down the street, they'd run across to the other side of the street. You get in the elevator, they start clutching their purse. Now, it doesn't work. They want all their kids to grow up to be either Jay-Z or Barack Obama. So what are you supposed to do to try and really unnerve them? So you say to them, well, have you ever thought about the fact that lower taxes could stimulate economic growth? Get away from me, get away from me.
Now that's scary. But if only we really lived in that post-racial society.
Well, that's true. But to paraphrase our former defense secretary, you have to live in the world in which you're given. You can't go to war with the world that you'd like to have, or something like that.
He said you can't go to war with the army you want. You go to war with the army you have.
And as a comedian, you have to go to war with the world in which you live.
So you labeled Mayor Bloomberg King Michael 7 years ago.
Wow, did I? Oh my goodness!
One of my researchers dug that up.
You were reincarnating yourself as Tim Russert, right? And bringing out all of these things that I've said.
So, do you still see him that way? And what lesson should the king have learned yesterday about his reign?
The funny thing about it was, though, that I think seven years ago, actually, I think I was supporting Michael Bloomberg. I mean, I was criticizing him at the same time for I'm not quite sure what that particular issue was, and I voted for him in 2005 in his re-election. And in fact, I think I wrote a very, very strongly supportive column after that, talking about how he had succeeded in bringing different aspects of the city together.
I think the context of that actually was when he was raising property taxes to deal with the last fiscal downturn.
That's exactly right. And I think what we saw this week with the election is, an electorate that after 8 years, they may still like the job he's done, but I think a part of it is a little bit of Bloomberg fatigue. And also, there is that, and we saw this also in the Democratic primary. There is real frustration, real anger on the term limits issue, and for whatever reason, it's amazing how many polling outfits we have here. Nobody seemed to quite get that. And I think what was very frustrating, and this actually I think fits with the King Michael aspect of it, is it wasn't just the fact that he at one point said it would be a disgrace to overturn term limits without a voter referendum, and then turned around and did it. It was very, very clear, and I think and I credit the people of the city to recognize that, is that he and the city council basically let the clock play out. They waited until it was too late to put the referendum before the people sometime during last year, and they said, "Oh, it's too late now, and we have to do it through the city council."
And it was their way of insulating themselves from the risk that the voters wouldn't allow them to extend. Which
is something that Christine Quinn, she started privately polling this about
City Council Speaker.
She started privately polling this about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, and her polling showed that it would have lost. The public was very, very satisfied with the structure of 2 terms or 8 years, or however you wanted to look at it for citywide officials and the city council members. And again, they, by subterfuge and then legislative overreach, they decided to push forward.
On your website, Ragged Thoughts, you have a famous moment of the mayor being arrogant, and I think we have it ready to screen.
Still is some business going on, and in fact, I'm reasonably optimistic that we turn the corner.
Or maybe not.
If the economy is turning around,
as you said, does that mean that the rationale for extending term limits, which was the fiscal challenge?
Why don't you just get serious questions here?
No, but the question is...
The rationale for extending term limits is the city council voted it, and the public's going to have a chance on November 3rd to say what they want, and I don't think we have to keep coming back to that. When you have a serious question about the economy, I'd be happy to answer it. Anything else? Thank you very much.
Nothing else?
Nothing else? Doesn't seem. Thank you.
If you have a serious question, now that the mayor had said that he was the one.
Well, actually, he was even
prior to that clip, just by way of context, right? He said that one of the reasons that it was right to extend term limits at this time, and his supporters said this, is that he's uniquely qualified to deal with this financial moment. So when he was announcing there that things were turning up for the city coffers, then Ozzie Pabera from the New York Observer asked him, does this mean your rationale for term limits is out the window? And you heard how he slapped him down.
And it was actually it was a moment after that where the camera then picks him up, saying to Mr. Pabera, you're a disgrace. And a couple of weeks before that, there had been another kind of a moment where, in another press conference, where it wasn't even the mayor's press conference, he was there supporting some other officials, and he had a moment to speak, where a member of the press who is in a wheelchair, I think his tape recorder got accidentally started turning on because a cameraman jostled it, and the mayor said, turn that thing off. And Speaker Quinn whispered in his ear, said, the gentleman's disabled, give him a moment here. And he said, I don't care, I want this done. I mean, I think those are little moments like that.
And the term limits extension and the overwhelming spending on the campaign, which was in every New Yorker's face constantly for the last few months, reinforces that image. But here is a very interesting stat from the exit polls, and I want to get your thoughts on it. All of that wound up in a fairly significant number of people who think he's doing a good job voting against him. If you look at the exit polls, he got 50% of the vote. 70% of those who voted yesterday said he's doing a good job, that they approve of the job he's doing as mayor. That means 20% of the voters yesterday thought Bloomberg is doing a good job and voted against him. And it seems to be because even though he's doing a good job, they were so angry about term limits and the way he ran the campaign that they voted for Thompson.
I think that's exactly right. And in fact, I kind of sensed that this was going to be happening. I didn't think it was going to be 5 points. But one of the things I did notice when all the polls is that his approval rating was, I think, in the mid-60s, maybe 62, 63, 64%.
Which is excellent.
Right. But against Thompson, his re-elect was never higher than 52 or 53%. There was often an 18-point gap, like Thompson might be 33 or 36% and something, but Bloomberg's was never above 52 or 53. That suggested right there was this gap between the 64% who thought he was doing a great job, and right there you could tell that there was 14% who weren't ready to support him.
Does maybe the comedian side of you, or maybe the political analyst side of you, think that this says something funny about our relationship as human beings with our politics and our politicians? I mean, if you think your plumber is doing a good job, you don't say, yeah, but I've had the same plumber for 8 years. I'm tired of him. I want to try something new. But we seem to do that with our politicians.
Well, it's also the case you might have a slightly more dubious view of your plumber if you felt, yes, he's doing a very good job, but do I have to see his face every single day I turn on my computer or turn on my television set? If I open up my window, there's the plumber. At that point, you'd probably be calling the cops and say, stop stalking me. And I think there was certainly an element of that. And I think there were a couple of.
And we've had that, by the way, with Joe the plumber, who the Democrats said, I just don't want to see your face anymore.
Well, actually, he recognized that his 15 minutes were up, and he decided to leave the stage. Of course, when you can spend $100 million, you can stick around for a lot longer than 15 minutes.
Which brings up the national implications of yesterday's race, seriously. And for the Republican Party, I'm not sure how to view yesterday's election day. Obviously, the Republicans won the governorships in New Jersey and Virginia. Those were considered the marquee races. But you could argue that these were local races fought on local issues, like property taxes and corruption in New Jersey, whereas the real bellwether was that one upstate New York congressional district in the Adirondacks where Sarah Palin and Glenn Beck and everyone else got involved behind the conservative, and the Democrat won.
And as you may have heard, it was such an outrageous result that Glenn Beck ended up having to go through an appendectomy within 24 hours. It's quite true. Who would have guessed that the 23rd district?
There's definitely material for you in that.
Exactly. Who would have guessed that the 23rd district of New York would be, all the eyes of the country would be on it. I think for the Republican Party, 16 years ago, the off-year election actually did turn out to be a bellwether. In 1993, in New Jersey, ironically enough, we had a governor, a Democratic governor, who had raised taxes when he said he wouldn't, Jim Florio, and he was challenged by somebody named Christy Todd Whitman, and he lost. The Republicans took over Virginia. Here in New York, Rudy Giuliani became mayor, and the Democrats haven't seen the inside of City Hall since then. And that turned out to be a foreshadowing for the Republican Revolution in 1994. I think it's way too soon to say that's what we're going to be seeing now. But there are some, and in each of those cases, there were local issues at play in New Jersey and Virginia and here in New York. But it also said something about the general mood of the public and a certain wariness of Democrats being in complete control of everything.
Last thing, and we have 30 seconds. I've been hearing some people say that the results yesterday mean that health reform will not pass this year and will be kicked over into 2010. Do you think there's a relationship there?
There's a possibility. The House is scheduled to definitely have a vote on it within the next few days. Harry Reid, however, said even before the election results were coming in that he was not going to be held hostage to any specific timetable. So there is that possibility.
Which means he doesn't have his 60 votes
Which
yet.
means he doesn't have his. Which means he does not have his 60 votes. I think, however, the White House is going to put all the pressure they can, because pushing it into 2010, I think, makes it even more of a volatile political issue than it is right now.
Robert George, thanks a lot. We'll see you in the Post. Do you have any gigs coming up that you want to promote?
Well, actually, I will be. Thank you for asking. I will be at the Broadway Comedy Club on Saturday, November 14th. So 6 o'clock show. So come
have
by.
Fun.
Please come by.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Coming up, art inside the vault, those masterpieces in the private collections of banks and other financial institutions. Now that we've bailed them out, whose art is it anyway?
Did you know CUNY leads the way for students with disabilities?
CUNY leads to my career as a healthcare professional.
CUNY leads to my career as an accountant.
CUNY leads to my career as a music teacher.
CUNY leads means linking employment, academics, and disability services. If you're a CUNY student with a visible or invisible disability, the City University of New York offers eligible students free career development and placement services.
Gain access to exciting employment opportunities through the power of a CUNY education.
As an employer, CUNY Leads provides me with a more qualified, diverse workforce.
Each campus has its own Leads counselor, a go-to person who knows you
and helps you enjoy every aspect of college life.
For more information and to find out if you qualify, visit cuny.edu/CUNYLeads. CUNY Leads to the career I always wanted.
Ma, guess what? I went back to college.
No, I didn't quit my job.
I'm finishing my degree with a CUNY Online Bachelor's in Business. I interact online with real City University of New York faculty on a schedule that fits my busy life. Ma, you should look who's teaching at CUNY. And it all leads to a high-quality Bachelor of Science degree in business. I can attend class anywhere, anytime. Yes, Mom, even at your house Friday night for dinner.
The CUNY Online Baccalaureate. Get back to business.
This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. We mere depositors don't get to see bank boardrooms and executive offices, but quite a few are graced with original works of art for private viewing only. However, after British taxpayers bailed out the Royal Bank of Scotland with over $30 billion, that bank agreed to put its collection on public display. So will Citibank, Bank of America, and other U.S. financial institutions taking taxpayer money follow suit? Reporter Paul Smalera, who blogs at True Slant and investigated this matter for Slate, their big money feature, will they tear the tarp off these masterpieces for us? Paul, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Brian.
Give us the context first from the UK. What exactly happened with the Bank of Scotland?
Sure. Well, the RBS, the Royal Bank of Scotland, was bailed out by the UK government, much the same way some of our own banks were bailed out.
And really bailed out. They are 70% owned by the British taxpayers,
It's
correct?
an AIG level bailout, definitely. And, you know, for whatever reason, the Department of Culture took interest in this, one of their government ministries, and they said, you know, we technically own 70% of you now, and that includes everything. Part of your assets are the works of art that you have, and maybe you should consider showing them.
And we're going to show you in just a minute 5 slides of works of art from private collections in U.S. banks. But is anything like that pressure, before we show these slides, coming to bear in the United States?
No, not really. I mean, one reason might be that we don't really have an analog to a Department of Culture in our government. We have the NEA, but they have a totally different mandate. So,
and you have a stat here that the NEA, National Endowment for the Arts, received $50 million to pass along to the nation's museums and arts groups under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. That's the stimulus.
Right.
But that's $50 million.
Right.
By comparison, Bank of America received $45 billion in government bailouts and TARP funds.
Exactly. Yeah, it's you know, it's not a major issue, but at the same time, it's a symbolic one. I think that the art that taxpayers have helped keep for these banks is not able to be seen by the public.
And we'll talk about how some of the banks do make the artworks available for public viewing.
Yep.
But let's take a look at some of the significant works of art owned by bailed out banks, or in the case of this first one, the bailed out insurance company AIG. Ownership of this Van Gogh, or as the purists say, Van Gogh, is actually contested, isn't it?
That's right. This is The Little Stream by Vincent van Gogh. And it's been with AIG for a very long time. The former CEO there, Hank Greenberg, bought it and had it hanging in his office. When he left the firm in 2005, it was the subject of a lawsuit over what belonged to AIG and what belonged to Star International, which is a weird sort of company that Greenberg had set up to fund AIG bonuses, of all things, and now has sort of become his personal vehicle and a bit of a charity. He claims Star owns it, and so he should have possession of it, and AIG claims the opposite.
So if the U.S. government, and I love that slide, by the way, I've seen, you know, prints, as many of us have, of that. I love that. I'd love to see that in person one day.
Yeah.
You know, by what model would allow Hank Greenberg or AIG or whoever actually owns it to put it on display for the public to see?
Well, you know, RBS, I wouldn't say to their credit, but they did actually show one painting from their collection of thousands in a bank in Scotland, and then it went on to the National Gallery in Scotland. And, you know, it would be the same thing as any private collector, where there's a sort of a lend agreement drawn up, and they would give it to a gallery for a certain period of time.
Here's another example of a painting we can't see. This Andy Warhol is owned by Citigroup.
$9. Citigroup received significantly more than that in the bailout. And this is a print, and it's like a lot of these, because they've been in private hands for so long, it's hard to value. Andy Warhol paintings have gone for $70 million in auction. That's his record is around there. But that's one that is a little bit of a background piece almost for the bank.
And that's one where form collides with content, right? The fact that it's called $9, right?
It's called $9, yes.
And you saw the $9 signs, and of course it's all about that at the moment.
Right.
In many cases, these works of art get acquired in takeovers, like this painting by Ed Ruscha, which belonged to Bear Stearns and was acquired by J.P. Morgan Chase. Now, Chase has a well-respected curator on staff, but in some cases the acquiring institution may have no appreciation of the cultural value to the public of the artworks that it's taking on board. You want to talk about this Ruscha first?
Sure. This is actually an interesting one. We managed to track down that it hung in the executive dining room and meeting room area in Bear Stearns. And actually, that's where, during the infamous weekend of the Bear Stearns bailout, a lot of the groups that were doing due diligence for the other banks, including J.P. Morgan Chase, were staging. And so that basically means that you can imagine, you know, Jamie Dimon or some of his superiors sitting there looking at this empty glass and thinking about the fact that Bear Stearns and all of its art was soon going to be part of their company.
So you see the Citigroup glass as totally empty.
You can read into it if you want.
Bank of America has decided to show some of its collection, and we'll see one of those, I think, in a minute. But tell us about what they've done.
They have actually started something. They have a proper name for it, but it's basically a set of turnkey exhibits.
And this is, I guess, maybe we should talk about the painting first, because it's up and the viewers can see it.
Sure.
Remember the cows all over New York a few years ago? I guess this is not that.
This is not that. This is Jamie Wyeth, and they own actually a lot of paintings by the Wyeth family. And they have a show called The Wyeth, 3 Generations, that they're basically lending out as a whole to smaller museums and institutions. It's funny, they're actually aiming for major national museums, but they weren't interested. So it's really the smaller ones, the regional galleries, like Montclair in New Jersey has an art gallery that's got this show. I believe the Bronx Museum will have it soon also.
That's a full-fledged museum in Montclair. It's the Montclair Art Museum, right?
Yeah. I mean, you know.
Yeah, just to
relative to
give them their due. It's not just a gallery; it is a museum.
Absolutely.
Right. So interesting. The major museums didn't want a Jamie Wyeth exhibit that includes paintings like this.
Yeah, and the reason that they made that decision is because they didn't feel comfortable with the Bank of America becoming a curator. And that's some pushback that they received.
So arts institutions are maybe conflicted about this. On the one hand, they may be reflecting the tone of your article, which is a little bit of outrage that these are not being made available when we've got skin in the game. On the other hand, a little resistant to having that kind of relationship with a financial institution?
Yeah, I think if they had their druthers, they might like to raid the collections and assemble shows for themselves. But the primary function of a museum is really the curation and assembling these works in a way that they want.
So taking the collection as a collection cedes curatorial control to the bank. That's what they don't want to give up.
Exactly.
It's not the conflict of interest. They want to be able to display it in the context of whatever they choose.
Yeah, I don't think they would feel comfortable. They might feel comfortable with Bank of America as a sponsor for a show, but not a curator.
How do you feel about that? Should they be sitting on that rather than taking a collection of great works of art and making it available to the public?
Well, the New York Times actually did a story on this particular aspect of Bank of America, and they had a great quote by the director of the Bronx Museum that said, we've never had, I believe it was a Warhol, actually, that they have in their Bank of America show right now. We've never had a Warhol here. I'm happy to see these works out in public in any format. I don't think they have to end up in the Met. I think it might be preferable that they don't end up in the Met.
One more painting that belonged to Lehman Brothers and was sold at auction this past weekend, I gather. What are we looking at?
Roy Lichtenstein, I Love Liberty. Interesting choice for, I guess it was chosen well before, but for a firm that wasn't bailed out by the U.S. government. That's one reason all their paintings are at auction right now.
So the government sold this at auction?
The bankruptcy trustee.
The bankruptcy trustee.
Basically
Who gets the money?
It goes to pay off their massive debt obligations, which I believe are something like $230 billion.
Various of Lehman's creditors get a piece of I Love Liberty by Roy Lichtenstein. You know, it's easy to say that because we're bailing out some of these institutions that we should be able to see the works of art. But is it an outrage, a step too far? I mean, if I'm a regular shareholder of a private corporation, do I necessarily have the right to say, I want to see every private thing that you have, you know, in your institution? Is it different than that? Is it somehow morally different than that?
You know, I wouldn't say that it's an obligation for every bank to show every piece of art that decorates their halls, but I think there's a case to be made that, you know, we do own large portions of the banks, and the bailout was constructed in such a way that we try to avoid that word ownership. But when you look at the sheer fact of the matter, they have billions of dollars of taxpayer money. So it would be nice if somewhere in there was consideration given that some of these things should be shown.
People can see your article on slate.com. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks a lot.
Finally tonight, with the Yankees in the World Series this year, a piece of film has surfaced of Babe Ruth playing ball. It is so rare to see the Bambino actually play. This clip is from 1928, and we will see the only film. There it is, Babe Ruth in the field. This is the only piece of film of Babe Ruth, hands on knees, ready position, and we're seeing an outfield wall here. Can't yank him out. The old Yankee Stadium. I am guessing this is. Now we're going to see Babe Ruth hit. Here he's going to swing and start running. That big frame lunging at the ball, running down the line, but it was foul. Now he's going to take a pitch. Here comes strike two. He's going to stand there. And here comes called strike three. Now look at him clown. He just struck out, but he's going to lean on his bat, mug for the audience, I'm so sad, and then slink away. How rare is that? Babe Ruth footage, newly discovered from 1928. And that's it for this week's show. We're here live Wednesday nights at 7:30 or anytime online at brianlehrer.tv. Next week, micro-volunteering over the web, videoing the violence in Mexico and Manhattan unpaved. Between now and then, tune into my daily radio show, 10 a.m. on WNYC Radio. Tomorrow morning, Bridge Bloggers. They translate between countries and cultures online. Have a great night.